So from our vantage point, from Zipline, we often hear that there's a compromise. You either need to choose between store execution or store engagement. And so what we solve for is that we really bridge that gap. Oops, this is a little bit clicky. So we really bridge that gap. So we believe that if you arm your store teams with the knowledge behind the brand vision, what it's an effort for about the product education, and then you give your associates and your store teams knowledge about what their role is in making that come to life, that is what is going to drive that brand experience in store for you. So as a little bit of background for me, I actually spent over 10 years, a decade, in retail, specifically focused on store operations and communications. And a lot of the time, from over 10 years, 4 communication evolutions. I'm not sure who, I see some smiles in the audience. Yes, I'm talking to you. There's always a breakdown between the brand's strategy that headquarters develops and what happens in stores. So sometimes it looks like this, right? I hear a couple laughs, and sometimes it even looks something like this, right? You know who you are. I think the hardest part behind this is that it's not because your store teams don't want to do the thing, right? It's not ill intent. We're just not giving them the right tools to do their jobs properly. So one of my favorite slides is actually this one, because that felt like me in headquarters. That feels like a lot of the store managers. People are just going to too many different places. They can't find the things that they're looking for. It's like drinking from a fire hose. Yep. And so Linz is here with me today to talk about how LUSH kind of like calm the quiet, calm the chaos. And so I'd just like to thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know you have a pretty unique perspective in terms of your journey to LUSH.
Yes.
And I know you were also in stores as well. So can you kind of take us through that journey and your personal experience?
Yeah. So I started in retail as well about over 10 years ago. I'm not going to tell you how many years over. A good chunk of my retail experience was actually lived out at Lululemon Athletica. So I started there in the shops as a associate and kind of worked my way up from there. So eventually opening seasonal shops, managing a store in Australia for a little while, and eventually making my way back to the head office to work in a communications capacity for Lululemon. And that role for me was kind of my gateway role into the world of communications. And I really focused on streamlining information and ensuring that shops had everything they needed every single day to do their jobs. And that was my focus.
Yep.
After being in that role for a while, I was approached to join the LUSH team, and I was so very happy to do so. And a lot of the work I do there is very similar. So it's about streamlining communication, creating efficiency, ensuring that the shops have what they need every day. And also within the past year, we launched a new communications platform. Yeah.
Great. And I think, one of the things about your journey that's awesome is that you've worked for very aspirational brands. Completely. And I just love to hear you have been thrilled. I've heard you talk so highly of LUSH.
Yes.
And so what are the things, it's such a strong brand.
Yeah.
And so I just love to know what are the things that have resonated for you in your role and about the brand promise.
Yeah, totally. So I was fortunate enough this morning to sit in on another session about mission-driven companies. And a lot of what was being shared on the stage and a lot of what I heard really resonated with me in terms of companies having a purpose. Yeah. And I remember when I was first learning about LUSH and thinking about joining the team, and it was very clear to me very quickly that not only do they talk the talk, but they also walk the walk. So you guys can see this "We Believe" statement up here, and it's really inspiring to work for a company who's not afraid to take a stand on what they believe in and have them believe in really powerful things. So I love it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And from our perspective, I think I read something from Accenture a couple weeks ago that were saying, 47% of consumers will leave a brand that lacks purpose. Yeah. And I think the market's trending that way, and you guys are just killing it.
Yeah.
So, every time I walk back by a store, though, it is like packed. So, and it's like so crazy. I was in Carmel, we were escaping from the fires. It's like walking by the store, people are just like having such a good time.
Yep.
The store was like full. It was maybe like 11 o'clock in the morning. It's clear that you guys are just offering something so distinct to customers in the brick and mortar experience. So what's your secret?
Well, I can't tell you all the secrets, but what I can tell you, for those of you who have experienced our shops, have experienced our brand, the product is incredible. But I would say what really stands out to me and makes the biggest difference are those employees on the front line, those people we have in the shops every day. And to throw out another buzzword of, I would say, NRF, it's really focused on that experience that is created in shops. So whether you are witnessing a bath bomb demo or you are getting an arm massage with our latest body lotion, it is really about tailoring that experience to whatever that customer needs in the moment. And I think that is something that really sets us apart.
Totally. And then from like your seat and a communications role, like how does communications feed, how does it support the in-store experience in your mind?
Yeah.
And like what role does associate engagement, like how does that fit in?
Yeah, so I think with retail communication, I am not really speaking directly to the customer, I'm speaking to all of our associates. So essentially, what is most important about what I do is making sure they have the information they need to do their job, making sure it's easy to find, making sure, I think ultimately the goal of my role is to make their lives easier. And by making their lives easier and streamlining their workload, they actually get to spend more time with their customers. So I think that's the biggest impact on the customer experience. We give them what they need, we give it to them with a bow wrapped on it, and it is concise and sweet and short so they can be on the floor engaging with the people like they want to be.
Yeah.
And from an engagement perspective, I think there's a lot of thoughts about engagement, and I think a lot of people think about engagement and think about parties and think about fun and think about brand storytelling and brand love, and absolutely, yes, that is engagement. And I think there's also a foundational piece of employee engagement that comes with being crystal clear on what you need to do to be successful in your role. So with Zipline, we're able to approach that from both sides. We can give them that direction. It is crystal clear. And I don't want to go too far ahead, but it's fun and it's light and it really pulls them in when we can. Yeah.
And I remember talking to you earlier, and you're talking about like there's a pyramid of needs, right? And before you can be like really engaged, you have to have like clarity behind your role.
Totally.
And you have to know like the meaning and the prioritization of what you need to do.
Yeah.
And how it fits in before you actually can have those more like elevated experiences. So
completely. I think if you're unsure of what needs to happen in your shop on any given day, it doesn't matter how many treats you get or how many coffees you get or how many parties are thrown.
Yeah.
You don't feel quite right. So the goal is to give them that foundation so they never have to question that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So like, their teams have been incredibly happy, but let's like take a blast to the past.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, before you implemented Zipline, what was some of the feedback? What were some of the things that you were hearing?
Yeah, so
what did execution look like too?
Yeah, so I think from an execution standpoint, it was really interesting because it wasn't something we had a ton of visibility into. The way we were communicating pre-Zipline, there wasn't anything that necessarily shops would check off and say, yes, we did this, it's complete. So you just run on the assumption that, of course, it's all done. Right. And our managers are entrepreneurs and they run their business and they do what's right for them in the moment. So from a support perspective, without that visibility, it's difficult to keep your fingers on the pulse of how much information you're giving them, if it's the right amount, if it's too much. So execution, huge question mark to start with. But in terms of shop feedback, you can see up on the screen, it was difficult to find things they needed to do their roles. We used to give them a calendar that was a PDF paper document, which is great for about a week or two. We're all in retail. We know that things change and that you need to be agile. So that was a pain point. It was difficult to know what they're responsible for and what's important. So that circles back around to that engagement piece we were talking about. And one of the teams, I'm sure more than one of the teams, had a text chain to keep up to date with what they needed to do in shop. So that was a big red flag for me. We want our people to have their personal time on their personal phone when they're away from work and only worry about work when they're there. So these were some of the biggest things that we really focused on.
Yeah. And I can say from a lot of conversations, maybe with some of you in the room, you weren't alone.
Yeah, totally.
So, but it's a kind of a big problem to tackle, right? You're getting all of this feedback from so many different places.
Yes.
Communications all over the place. So when you took a step back, can you just like walk us through, like, what was the framework? How did you actually kind of like segment how to approach the problem? Like, how did that even work? What did that look like?
Yeah, well, I think the most important step of the process was really to start with the shops themselves. Mm-hmm. Having been in shops for as long as I was, having been on the other side, knowing that they're the end user of this product, first and foremost, it has to work for them. There is no other way. So understanding their needs and what's important to them right off the hop is crucial. From there, you also need to consider all of your audiences and all of the different angles. So even though they are that end user, we work in very close partnership with a lot of departments at the office, and those departments have needs, and those departments need to communicate certain things at certain times. So making sure that the direction we were going to go in would also work for them, huge piece of the puzzle. And the last thing, just knowing that the plan will change along the way. I think I knew where we were going. I knew the end results. I knew what we wanted to get to, and I had to hold onto the framework very, very loosely because things come up, you learn things that you weren't expecting, so it was just knowing that you were going to get there, but the road may not be as straight as you think it will be. Yeah.
So in terms of like taking a look at the problem, reflecting on the framework, how did you even, implement? Like, what were the first steps? How did you start out? I know a lot of people will be going back, after this in the quarter planning, looking at your roadmap, looking at your priorities. Like, what's the first step that you took?
Yeah, so the first thing for us was evaluating what possible solutions there were. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people outside of this room, maybe even some in this room, who I spoke with at last year's NRF and beyond. And I think finding the right solution that checks the most boxes is the biggest step. And I still remember meeting with you and Jeremy, wherever you are, Jeremy in the room, for the very first time and going through what Zipline could offer our teams and painting the picture of what the pain points are and what the issues were. And it was very clear for me right off the hop that you and your team really understood what it was like to be in shops and be receiving all of those wild communications from all the different directions, but also from a support perspective. You knew the needs, and that is a big reason how we ended up here.
That's awesome. I remember also talking with you, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's possible to solve the problem.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's a game-changing thing if you have been on either side of the equation and you know there are these issues and you just want to make it better. So to know that there was a possibility was incredible.
Yeah.
But then from there, I think the next step was trying it in action. Because even though, as I said before, I could see where we were going, I knew the potential with the platform, there were still a lot of questions around what it would actually look like in shops and what it would feel like to our teams. So that took us to a pilot, which was crucial for this implementation.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times there's so many varying questions. Like everyone's like, what about this? What's this answer?
Totally.
And it's like you have to try it. Like, to find out the answer, you can only think so much about it.
Exactly. I can give you my best guess, but until we get it in their hands, we don't know for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I am curious, and I'm sure these guys are curious. When you, can you give us like a brief overview of like when you entered the pilot, what was life like before Zipline?
Yeah.
And then what was it like during the pilot using the product?
Yeah, so I think the slide you had up before is one of my favorite slides. So from my store manager days back in the day, this feeling is so very real, and everything coming at you from so many different directions. And this was my experience to a T. And I would say for our shops, there are a lot of similarities here as well. So those static paper documents that I talked about before, and having to keep track of all of those, getting emails from multiple departments about multiple things, from a support perspective, not having any visibility into what's being asked of our shops at any given time, phone calls from whomever, whenever, always great. It was just coming from all angles, so there was definitely a big opportunity for us to streamline.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then after you implemented Zipline.
Yeah, so here's a little sneak peek of what it looks like. But we went from sending out these messages where we had no visibility even into readership or to ensure that our message was reaching our people, to having these really clear, cohesive messages where we could include videos and GIFs and definitely emojis, and really pull our people in and engage them in that fun way with the information they need to know to do their jobs every day. At the same time, within that same communication, we've taken every task that normally they would have to plan out, schedule out themselves, and we put it on the date it needs to be done. So it just really streamlines the workflow of any big campaigns or projects that they're working on. Another huge shift was the calendar. So going from that static document to having something that was in real time and updated in the moment, and only showing what you need to see, not what the entire business needs to see. It was really, really crucial and important for our teams.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And can you share some of the feedback? So I'm going to actually hand this to you.
Yeah, so this is, what you're about to see is probably my favorite part about the whole pilot. This first quote from one of our shops: "My team will cry and revolt against me if we take this program away." So this was a huge sign of success in this pilot. You see also ease of use, fantastic, simple, effective. Being out of the business for a week and being caught up in less than half an hour. For those of you who have been in shops, if you're out of the business for a week, my goodness, you have got some reading to do. So the fact that this is what it changed into was incredible. You see 30 minutes of time saving every single day. We're going to touch on more time saving shortly. But just making their lives easier, enabling them to devote more time to their business, making it easy to follow up. The results we heard back in terms of qualitative feedback from our teams were really just incredible.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I love that store love. It means so much.
Totally.
However, to your point about different audiences, there's often a business case that has to be made, right?
Yep.
Cost justification. How did that work?
Yeah.
And how did you do that? Because that is such a hard thing from a communications perspective. Communications is the train that brings everything into stores. So if that's broken, nothing gets done. But it's so hard to quantify what that is.
Totally. So what we did to get those numbers and get that information that I knew the leadership team would be looking for is we did a pre-Zipline survey, so looking at life in the shop, communications, what the state of the state was. And then we also did another survey once we had launched Zipline. So what you see here, those blue bars are life pre-Zipline, the pink bars are life with Zipline. So we had a few statements that would really show us whether or not we were successful.
Okay.
So you can see here that in terms of finding the information they needed, there was a huge improvement.
Yep.
Another huge improvement in knowing when things have been updated and what's new.
Because nothing ever changes in retail.
Oh my
ever.
gosh, never. Agility. Knowing what the expectations are and when they need to complete something. So that goes back around to that engagement piece again. And the last thing, so believing that the current communication tools support execution of action in shops. So from all angles, from their perspective, this was a huge win.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting, when I see those last two slides about, I know what's expected of me and communication tools supporting my work in shops, like the ratings are pretty high, and it's clear that you and the team did such a good job at doing like what you could do with that, right? Yep. But then it's kind of like you needed technology to shift you to kind of like bump it to like 5 out of 5 and really like take you that final mile.
Totally. The communication we were putting out, everything, there were so many things we were doing so very right, and we just needed the right vehicle to do it to take us to that next level.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. The last thing, another thing that was great to take back to the leadership, we were able to project a savings of $1 million in labor of our shop manager time based on the data we collected from the pilot. So what's most exciting about this is that this is only shop manager time. This didn't account for the entire team and all of the time that we were saving. So I can only imagine how much above and beyond this number actually goes. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that data and your process and your journey.
Yeah.
I'm like very appreciated.
You're welcome.
So I think a lot of these guys are going to be going back. They're going to be doing business cases or talking about it with their leadership team, whether it's Zipline, whether it's other solutions, for other like POS systems or whatever. But in terms of just like key takeaways for people,
yeah.
I'm curious, like as we reflect, what are the things that you would suggest or recommend? What are things that if you could do it again, you would double down on?
Yeah, there's a couple things I would do differently. The biggest thing, as you can see, pilot sooner rather than later. So this is something that, as I said before, I had ideas of how it would work. I could see it coming together, but it wasn't until we piloted that we really knew that this was the right direction. And I would say the most powerful thing about the pilot was when those results started coming in, my voice cheering for this platform wasn't necessarily the loudest voice in the room anymore, and I never wanted it to be that. So knowing that we hit the mark with our shops, we probably could have figured that out sooner if we would have piloted sooner. The next thing, just bringing the voice of the shops to the stakeholders. So when we took this back to the LUSH leadership team and we're really talking about the wins in this platform, one of the most powerful things we did is we actually asked one of our shops to create a video of what life has been like for them with Zipline since launching. So we took that video of them talking about their experience and how it had made their lives so much easier in shop, and we sent that with all of our results.
That's great.
So I think having that shop voice, those people we're supporting who we want to be able to succeed every day, having them be the person to tell our leadership about it was really powerful.
Yeah.
And the last thing is just to trust the process. So working in communications, working on an operations team, a big part of my role is to look for holes in things and poke holes so it can become better and we can move forward and communication is holistic and clear.
Yep.
And so when it came to looking at platforms and trying to figure out what was right for our shops, I tried to poke so many holes in why this wouldn't work so I could catch it before we launched. And it wasn't until I spoke with my new friend Mike at Lego, who has also launched Zipline, about 3 or 4 days before the pilot and said, Mike, I have to be missing something. Like, it's too easy. There has to be something here. And I just remember him telling me, like, no, it's just that easy. This is how it works. And hearing it in that moment, I felt the weight drop off my shoulders and just like, okay, this is right. We're on the right track. It's going to be good. And so if I could go way back in time, I would say just trust the process all the way through. If it feels easy, sometimes it's just easy.
That's amazing. Well, we are so grateful to have partners like you and like Mike at Lego. So I just want to thank you for your time and thank you for being such a great partner to us always.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
So for those in the room that have questions, I think we have a couple more minutes, but feel free to ask something. We have some mics set up at the front.
Hi. How does that dovetail with your training and your training platforms or e-learning?
So we do have a training platform that we use. I would say the biggest way that Zipline interacts with our training is just to set our teams up with essentially what's coming up for the month. So anything around staff meetings, if they need supporting documentation, if they need supporting videos, we will often include it in there. I would say that mostly we use Zipline as the vehicle to get a lot of our training to the shops. Does that help? Yeah?
All right. Oh, one more question.
Hi, Lindsay. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. What I love about LUSH is that it's a global company and global brand. Do you have any plans to implement Zipline in your shops outside of North America, or is it already implemented?
Juicy question. So I am responsible for the North American fleet, and our offices in Vancouver and Toronto are the head offices for North America. So this isn't something I've been in conversation with our UK team, but there's definitely always potential for that.
And I would like to answer that question too, that we are fully internationalized. So we do support teams in Asia, LUSH team. We do support Europe, different languages, multilingual. Asia, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese. I did not do right by my mother. I think I learned more through the Zipline implementation in Asia than in my house, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Hi. Can you tell us a little bit about what it takes to operationally run this? So you create your own team. Is it like centrally neutral to all the other functions? Because I imagine tasks are coming from all over the place.
Yep.
So just a little bit about what it actually takes to run it outside of the technology itself.
Yeah, so in terms of people who have access on the publishing end for the platform, we have technically a team of 4. I would say 2 of us are more communications focused, the other 2 are more operationally focused. So long story very short, the way it works is we work really closely with all of our department partners to have them submit information through our team about what they need to complete. Sometimes it's bullet points about what they're looking for. Sometimes it's something very well written, which makes my job so much easier, which is lovely. And we really try to schedule into what's happening when, so we can push the right amount of information at the right time. Yeah, you're welcome.
Since the platform is mainly focusing on...
Oh, can you speak a little bit louder?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I was wondering, since it says store managers, district managers, and HQ, LUSH stores don't consist of only one person.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure to track if the store manager is actually delivering all these to-dos and messages towards store staff, part-timers, etc.?
Yeah, totally. So one of the nice things about Zipline is that, okay, let me backtrack. So every person in our shops has access to this system. The expectation we set our shops up with right off the hop is that the leadership team is checking it every shift. Beyond that, it's up to the manager to choose what feels right for their shop. So in some shops, everyone's checking it every shift. In other shops, it may just be that leadership team taking and pulling that information and taking that down to the teams every day. From a readership perspective, one of the great things about Zipline is that within each message that is published, you can see which users have logged in and clicked on that message and gone into it. So we do have visibility into what our reach looks like. Yeah. Yeah.
More. So when it comes to the KPIs, I mean, one source of truth, where do they then monitor how it's going in the store? So if the platform for communication is Zipline, do they monitor sales on a US system, or where do they get those reports? You cannot pull them out of Zipline, right?
Yep. So Zipline is essentially a system that we use to centralize all communication and messaging into the shop, which has been huge. And we do have another system that we use for our sales and our targets, and it's just been about making sure that the information is available and pulling the information into Zipline to really set up your team for the day and what it looks like. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Oh, one more question. So we're at last question, since people are probably looking for drinks.
Did this replace your existing communications tool?
Yes.
And then if so, what were the biggest challenges with adoption? Where were they?
Yeah, change management is hard. But I'd say one of the greatest things about adoption is that because the platform is so intuitive and because the first time you log in, you understand what the benefits are very quickly. So I mean, when you launch any new tool, you are going to have people who are a little bit resistant to the change. So I would say I, in those circumstances, had a couple more phone calls with shops, or just talking through what they were concerned about, or showing them what they didn't even know was possible in the platform, to really help push them forward. But I would say for the vast majority, once you log into the system and you see how it works for the first time, and if your communication is no longer coming to you any other way, you're in the system. Does that help?
It does. What about for head office? Did you have problems with creating cross-functional disciplines with partners?
I wouldn't say problems. I definitely wouldn't say problems. I would say enrolling departments. When you're on a communications team, I think what can be tricky is that even though you don't want to, at times you slow down the process. So even though your role is to support every department in getting their communication out the right way, they no longer have the ability to just send out that email in the moment when they want to. And I get that, and that's harder. So I think it was really important to enroll our department partners in the vision that we have, and letting them know that essentially we're all on the same team. We only want to make their lives easier. And by communicating the right way through the right vehicle at the right time, we may actually get a better success rate than just flipping off that one email. Yeah.
All right. Well, we will be up here for a little bit if other people have questions. But thank you so much for joining us. I know it's like a long conference and it's the last day. I believe that there are already drinks set up. Obviously not for us, but
Yeah.
we wish it was. So thank you.
Thank you.